Relax, no one here knows us.
That's my husband.
The music festival in Los Angeles roared with excitement. Thousands of people filled the arena. Bright stage lights swept across the crowd, while giant screens above the stage searched for faces in the audience. Everyone waited for the same moment. The camera would land on someone, and suddenly their face would appear 20 feet tall for the entire stadium to see. Friends shouted. Couples laughed. Strangers waved at the camera. The crowd loved it. During a pause between songs, the camera moved toward the very important person section. A tall man stood near the railing overlooking the sea of people. His arm rested comfortably around the shoulders of the woman beside him. They leaned closer while the music played. Then the camera stopped. Their faces appeared on the massive screen above the stage. The crowd reacted instantly. Cheers erupted. The festival host laughed through the microphone. "Well, look at that. We found a happy couple tonight." The man glanced toward the camera with an easy smile. The woman looked up at him. Without hesitation, he kissed her. The giant screen broadcast the moment across the entire stadium. Thousands of people cheered. Phones shot into the air as the audience rushed to record the scene. At that moment, the crowd believed they were witnessing a romantic concert memory. They had no idea the moment carried consequences far beyond the festival. Because someone important was about to see the same kiss on television, and her reaction would shock everyone. The crowd exploded with excitement the second the kiss appeared on the giant screen. Cheers rolled across the arena like thunder. Some people whistled while others laughed and clapped at the unexpected concert moment. To the thousands inside the stadium, it looked like a romantic surprise. But the audience did something modern crowds always do. They pulled out their phones. Hundreds of screens rose into the air. People recorded the giant display while the couple continued smiling on the screen above the stage. Within seconds, clips of the moment started spreading online. Short videos appeared across social media feeds. Concert, kiss cam finds rich couple, very important person romance at La Festival. People shared the clip without knowing who the man really was. Some viewers recognized him immediately. Comments started appearing under the videos. "Wait, isn't that Easton Cade?" Others quickly searched his name. Easton Cade was not just another concert guest. He was the founder of Cade Dynamics, a technology company that built infrastructure for major data networks across the United States. Business magazines often placed him on their covers. Investors followed his decisions closely. Now thousands of people were replaying a video of him kissing a woman inside a very important person section at a music festival. Phones continued recording while the crowd celebrated the moment. But one detail had not yet reached the internet: the identity of the woman he had just kissed. And when that truth surfaced, the story would grow even more shocking. As the video continued spreading online, more people began recognizing the man in the clip. His face was familiar to many viewers. Easton Cade. Technology magazines often placed him on their covers. Business channels invited him to speak about innovation and infrastructure. Investors followed his company closely. He founded Cade Dynamics, a rapidly expanding technology firm responsible for building critical logistics and data systems across the United States. Success had turned him into one of the most talked about entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. That recognition changed how people viewed the concert clip. The video was no longer a random festival moment. Now it showed a powerful CEO kissing a woman during a public event in front of thousands of cheering people. Online conversations intensified. People began asking a new question: who was the woman beside him? For several hours, the internet searched for the answer. Then someone inside the company recognized her. Her name appeared in a comment beneath the video: Viella Sloan. She worked at Cade Dynamics. Not as a junior employee, not as an assistant. Viella Sloan served as the company's human resources director. The comment spread quickly across the internet. Within minutes, viewers understood the full picture. A famous CEO, his HR director, a kiss broadcast on a giant concert screen. The story suddenly became far more complicated. Because somewhere far away from the loud festival crowd, another person had already seen the same moment. And she knew exactly who both of them were. Miles away from the noise of the Los Angeles festival, The ocean moved quietly against the Malibu shoreline. Inside a modern home overlooking the water, a television played the same concert broadcast. Valora Edivan stood in the living room holding a basket of freshly folded laundry. She had been watching the festival casually, while finishing small tasks around the house. The music echoed softly through the room as the camera moved across the crowd. She barely paid attention, until the screen suddenly shifted toward the very important person section. The giant display above the stage showed two people standing close together. Valora's eyes moved toward the television. For a moment, she did not react. Then recognition arrived. The man on the screen was her husband, Easton. Her hands froze. The basket slipped slowly from her grip. Clothes fell across the floor as the camera zoomed closer on the couple inside the very important person section. The crowd cheered loudly through the television speakers. Valora watched in complete silence. She saw the smile on Easton's face. She saw the woman beside him, Viella Sloan, the same HR director whose name had begun spreading across the internet only minutes earlier. Then the moment happened. Easton leaned closer, and he kissed her. The crowd inside the festival roared with excitement. But inside the Malibu home, the room fell completely silent. Valora stood motionless as the television replayed the moment again. The television replayed the moment again. Easton, Viella Sloan, the kiss on the giant concert screen. News commentators had already begun discussing the clip as it spread online. Inside the Malibu home, Valora Edivan remained standing in the middle of the living room. Clothes still lay scattered across the floor around her feet. Most people would have reacted immediately. Anger, shouting, phone calls, confrontation. But Valora did none of those things. She watched the screen quietly. Her face remained calm. After a few seconds, she walked toward the television and turned it off. The music vanished. The commentators disappeared. Silence filled the room. Only the distant sound of waves moving against the shore reached the house. Valora looked at her reflection in the dark television screen. "One moment can reveal everything," she said softly. Then she turned and walked toward the hallway. That night she made a decision. Not revenge, not confrontation, patience. And that decision would change the course of her marriage, her husband's reputation, and the future of an entire company. Now, I want to ask you something. If you were in Valora's position, what would you do? Would you confront your partner immediately? Or would you stay silent and learn the full truth first? Write your answer in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about relationships, hard choices, and second chances, subscribe to the channel now. Because Valora Edivan did something no one expected. Los Angeles hosted many large events every year, but the summer music festival along the downtown waterfront always drew the largest crowds. By evening, the venue had transformed into a sea of people. Lights flashed across the massive stage, while music rolled through the speakers with deep rhythm. Vendors moved through the walkways selling drinks and snacks. Groups of friends laughed, danced, and recorded videos to remember the night. Excitement filled the air. Fans had waited months for this event. Popular artists performed one after another while the crowd sang along to familiar songs. Some people stood close to the stage. Others relaxed farther back on the grassy areas overlooking the performance platform. Above the stage hung enormous digital screens. These displays allowed even the people far from the stage to see every movement of the performers. Camera crews moved constantly throughout the venue. Sometimes they focused on the singers. Other times, they pointed toward the audience. When the cameras scanned the crowd, people reacted instantly. They waved, shouted, and laughed whenever they realized the lens had landed on them. Everyone hoped to appear on the giant screen. The festival had become more than a concert. It had become a shared spectacle where every face in the audience might become part of the show. As the night progressed, the crowd grew louder with each performance. The final artist of the evening stepped onto the stage, while bright beams of light swept across the audience. The music vibrated through the ground beneath thousands of feet. People jumped, danced, and lifted their hands toward the sky. The giant screens above the stage continued displaying different sections of the audience. Whenever someone recognized themselves on the screen, their reaction became part of the entertainment. Couples hugged each other. Friends shouted with excitement. Some people even performed quick dance moves while the crowd cheered. The festival host encouraged the energy. "Let's see who we've got in the audience tonight," he called through the microphone. The camera operators followed his cue. Their lenses moved slowly across the very important person areas, where guests with special access watched the show from raised platforms overlooking the crowd. The giant screens displayed group after group. Each time the audience reacted with laughter and applause. The host joked with people who appeared on the screen, asking them to wave or cheer for the crowd. No one expected that the next pair to appear would create the most talked about moment of the entire night. Inside the very important person section, several well-known business leaders and investors stood together enjoying the music. Among them was Easton. Tall and confident, he leaned casually against the railing overlooking the crowd below. The flashing stage lights reflected across his dark jacket while he watched the performance. Beside him stood Viella Sloan. She listened to the music with a relaxed smile while speaking quietly with him between songs. Their conversation appeared comfortable and familiar. Neither of them noticed the camera at first. The operator scanning the very important person area paused when the lens settled on them. The giant screens above the stage changed instantly. Their faces filled the display for the entire arena to see. At first, Easton looked surprised. Then he smiled toward the screen like many other guests had done earlier in the evening. Viella laughed softly and looked up at him. The crowd responded with excitement as soon as they noticed the pair on the screen. From the perspective of the audience, they appeared to be another happy couple enjoying the festival together. The host chuckled through the microphone. "Well now, that looks like a romantic moment in our VIP section." The crowd waited to see what the couple would do next. The music continued playing while the giant screen remained fixed on Easton and Viella. The audience cheered, expecting a playful reaction. Easton glanced toward the massive display above the stage. The attention from the crowd seemed to amuse him. The bright lights illuminated his face, while thousands of people watched. Viella leaned slightly closer to him. For a brief moment they exchanged a quiet smile. The crowd began chanting and whistling, encouraging the couple to respond to the camera. Some people clapped rhythmically. Others shouted playful encouragement. Easton placed his arm more firmly around Viella's shoulders. The gesture appeared affectionate, almost instinctive. Viella looked up at him. The camera zoomed slightly closer. Then, without hesitation, Easton leaned down and kissed her. The giant screens displayed the moment in clear detail. For several seconds, the image remained frozen across the arena. The kiss seemed spontaneous, yet confident. From the perspective of the crowd, it looked like a romantic highlight of the festival. But the significance of the moment extended far beyond the cheering audience. The crowd exploded with excitement the moment the kiss appeared on the giant screens. Whistles echoed across the venue. Laughter and cheers followed from every direction. Many people clapped while pointing toward the display above the stage. To them, the moment felt joyful. Concerts often captured small romantic scenes between audience members. Those brief appearances became memorable highlights for the people involved. The festival host laughed again. "Well, that's what I call concert love," he joked into the microphone. More applause followed. No one inside the stadium questioned what they had seen. The crowd assumed they had simply witnessed a couple enjoying the music together. Strangers hugged each other. Friends cheered. Some people even shouted playful congratulations toward the VIP section. The atmosphere felt light and celebratory. Yet none of the cheering fans understood the reality behind the image on the screen. They did not know the man in the video had a wife watching television miles away. They did not know the woman he kissed worked inside his company. The audience celebrated a romantic moment. But outside the stadium, the meaning of that moment would soon appear very different. Within seconds, phones appeared throughout the crowd. People recorded the giant screen while the kiss replayed on the display above the stage. Some fans zoomed their cameras closer. Others shouted excited commentary while filming the scene. The recordings traveled quickly beyond the festival grounds. Short clips appeared on social media platforms almost immediately. Viewers posted captions describing the unexpected kiss during the concert. Friends shared the videos with each other. The internet responded with curiosity. Many viewers focused on the man's face. Some people recognized him immediately. Others searched his name after reading comments beneath the videos. Easton. His identity began appearing across thousands of posts. Online discussions followed quickly. Users debated the story behind the moment. Was the woman his partner? Was it a casual festival encounter? Speculation spread across social platforms, while more viewers shared the clip. What began as a brief concert image transformed into a widely discussed online topic within minutes. The video continued gaining attention with every new share. By the following morning, the video had traveled far beyond social media. News networks began discussing the clip during entertainment segments and business commentary programs. Television anchors replayed the moment repeatedly while explaining why viewers had become so interested. The footage showed the VIP section clearly. Easton Cade, standing beside Viella Sloan. The camera zoom. The kiss. Each broadcast examined the moment from different angles. Some programs focused on Easton's reputation as a technology executive, whose company held major contracts across the country. Others discussed the unusual circumstances surrounding the woman beside him. Viella Sloan served as Human Resources Director at Cade Dynamics. That detail quickly shifted public conversation. Commentators debated professional boundaries within corporate leadership. Online viewers continued sharing opinions across discussion forums and social platforms. What had started as a joyful festival moment now appeared on televisions across California. Each replay carried the same image. A famous CEO, his company's HR director, a kiss displayed for thousands of people. And somewhere far from the bright lights of the festival stage, the woman who knew Easton best had already seen the video. The Malibu coastline stretched quietly beneath the evening sky. Inside a modern glass home overlooking the ocean, the atmosphere felt peaceful and orderly. Large windows reflected the soft glow of the television, while the distant rhythm of waves moved steadily against the shore. Valora Edivane stood in the living room, holding a basket filled with freshly folded laundry. She moved slowly across the room, placing neatly folded clothes on the couch beside her. The routine felt familiar. After years of managing a demanding household and supporting her husband's busy schedule, small tasks like this often brought a sense of calm. The television played in the background. A live broadcast from the Los Angeles Music Festival filled the screen. Bright lights flashed across the stage while performers sang before thousands of cheering fans. Valora watched casually while continuing her work. She was not deeply invested in the concert. The broadcast simply provided background sound while she finished the evening chores. Occasionally, she glanced toward the screen when the music grew louder or the crowd reacted to something on stage. For the most part, her attention remained on the laundry in her hands. The night seemed ordinary, quiet, predictable. Within moments, that calm routine would change completely. The broadcast shifted to a wide shot of the audience. Camera operators moved their lenses across the massive crowd gathered at the Los Angeles Festival. The giant screens above the stage displayed faces from different sections of the audience. Valora looked toward the television briefly while folding a shirt. People waved excitedly when they realized they were being shown to the entire stadium. Couples hugged while their friends laughed and pointed toward the screen. The festival host joked with the audience through the microphone. Valora smiled faintly at the playful atmosphere. The camera continued moving across the crowd. For several seconds, the lens scanned the very important person section, where special guests watched the performance from raised platforms. The image remained steady on that section longer than usual. Valora lifted another shirt from the basket and folded it carefully. The music played louder through the speakers. Then the broadcast zoomed closer toward a pair of people standing near the railing inside the very important person area. Their faces appeared clearly on the screen. Valora glanced up again. This time her attention remained fixed on the television. Something about the image felt familiar. Within seconds she understood why. Valora stared at the television. The man on the screen stood beneath bright stage lights, while thousands of people watched him on the giant display above the concert stage. She recognized him immediately. Easton Cade, her husband. For a moment her mind refused to process the image. He stood in the very important person section of the festival with his arm resting comfortably around the shoulders of a woman beside him. Valora's hands stopped moving. The shirt she had been folding remained suspended between her fingers. The camera zoomed closer. The woman standing next to Easton looked up at him with a smile. Valora recognized her as well. Viella Sloan, Human Resources Director at Cade Dynamics. Valora had met her briefly during company gatherings and leadership events. Viella had always appeared professional and respectful during those encounters. Yet the scene on the television felt far from professional. Easton and Valora stood close together as the music played around them. The giant screen displayed their faces to the entire stadium. Valora remained perfectly still. Her eyes did not leave the television. The crowd inside the festival cheered loudly. Then the moment happened. The camera showed Easton leaning closer toward Valora. The crowd inside the stadium encouraged the moment with laughter and cheers. Valora watched the television in complete silence. Her fingers slowly loosened around the basket she had been holding. The plastic handle slipped from her grip. The basket tipped forward. Folded shirts and towels spilled across the polished floor. Clothes scattered near her feet while the broadcast continued playing. On the television screen, Easton leaned down and kissed Valora. The giant concert display showed the moment clearly. The audience inside the festival roared with excitement. Phones lifted into the air across the stadium as people recorded the scene. But inside the Malibu living room, the only sound came from the television speakers. Valora did not move. Her eyes remained fixed on the screen, while the broadcast replayed the image from another camera angle. The basket lay on its side near the couch. Laundry covered the floor. Yet Valora paid no attention to the mess. She continued watching the television. While the same moment appeared again, many people would have reacted immediately. Shouting, tears, phone calls filled with accusations. But Valora Edavane did none of those things. She stood quietly in the center of the room. Her breathing remained steady while the television replayed the clip once again. The commentators on the broadcast began discussing the couple shown on the giant screen. The crowd inside the festival continued cheering while the host joked about the unexpected romantic moment. Valora listened without expression. Her face remained calm. Inside her mind, memories moved quietly across her thoughts. The early years of her marriage with Easton. The nights they spent planning the future of Cade Dynamics while sitting in a small apartment filled with paperwork and ideas. She remembered helping him prepare presentations for investors when the company existed only as a hopeful vision. She remembered believing deeply in his ambition. Those memories passed silently through her mind while the television continued showing the kiss. Still, she did not react with anger. Instead, a deep stillness settled across the room. The broadcast replayed the moment once more. Easton, Valora, the giant concert screen, the cheering crowd. Valora watched the final replay without blinking. Then she took a slow step toward the television. The scattered laundry remained on the floor behind her. The room felt strangely quiet despite the music still playing from the broadcast. She reached for the remote control resting on the glass table near the couch. For a brief moment, she held it in her hand while the commentators continued discussing the clip. Then she pressed a single button. The television screen went dark. The music disappeared instantly. The voices of the commentators vanished. Silence filled the living room. Only the soft sound of waves outside the house reached the room through the open balcony doors. Valora stood facing the black screen. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass. The house felt calm again. But the calm carried a different weight now. Valora remained standing in front of the dark television screen. The reflection staring back at her showed a woman who looked composed despite the moment she had just witnessed. Outside, the ocean continued moving under the fading evening light. Inside the house, the scattered laundry remained untouched. Valora studied her own reflection for several seconds. Then she spoke quietly. One moment can reveal everything. Her voice carried no anger, no panic, only clarity. She turned away from the television and slowly walked across the room toward the hallway. Her steps remained steady. Inside her mind, thoughts began forming carefully. She understood that what she had seen might represent more than a single careless moment. Yet she also understood something else. Reactions made in anger rarely reveal the full truth. If there was more to the story, she intended to understand it completely. That night, Valora Edavane made a decision. Not confrontation, not revenge, patience. And that decision would shape everything that followed. Because while the world reacted to the viral concert video with shock and gossip, Valora chose something far more unexpected. She chose patience. The Malibu house remained quiet long after midnight. Outside, the ocean moved steadily under the moonlight, while the coastal road carried only occasional traffic. The festival in Los Angeles had ended hours earlier, and most of the city had begun settling into the late hours of the night. Shortly after midnight, The front gate of the Malibu property opened slowly. A dark car pulled into the driveway. Easton Cade stepped out and walked toward the front door with slow, deliberate steps. The long drive from Los Angeles had given him time to think, yet his thoughts remained unsettled. He entered the house quietly. The lights in the living room were off, leaving the room dim, except for the faint glow of a lamp near the hallway. The house felt calm, almost unchanged from the moment he had left earlier in the day. He placed his keys on the small table near the entrance. For a moment he stood still, listening. No television, no voices, only the distant sound of waves outside. Easton knew the video from the concert had spread quickly online. Messages had already appeared on his phone throughout the drive home, but one question remained in his mind. Had Valora seen it? Easton walked slowly through the house, half expecting the calm to break at any moment. He knew how the scene must have looked to anyone watching the broadcast. The kiss had been clear, public, and impossible to explain away as a misunderstanding. If Valora had seen the footage, she would have questions, difficult ones. As he moved down the hallway toward the bedroom, he prepared himself for confrontation. He imagined raised voices, sharp accusations, perhaps silence filled with disappointment. Yet the house remained still. When he reached the bedroom door, he paused briefly before entering. Valora lay asleep beneath the soft glow of the bedside lamp. Her breathing appeared steady, her posture relaxed beneath the blankets. Easton watched her quietly. For a moment he wondered if she truly had not seen the broadcast. But something about the situation felt uncertain. He changed clothes quietly and lay down on the opposite side of the bed, careful not to disturb her. Sleep came slowly. His mind replayed the concert moment again and again. And beneath those thoughts, one question continued pressing forward. How would Valora respond when morning arrived? Morning sunlight filled the Malibu kitchen through wide windows facing the ocean. The soft light reflected across the marble countertops, while the aroma of freshly brewed coffee spread through the room. Valora Edevan stood near the counter preparing 2 cups. Her movements were steady and unhurried. She poured coffee into a mug and placed it carefully on the kitchen island. Moments later, Easton entered the room. He had expected tension. Instead, he found his wife standing calmly beside the counter, as if the previous night had never happened. She looked toward him and offered a quiet greeting. "Good morning." Her tone sounded natural, warm even. Easton hesitated before responding. "Good morning." Valora slid the second cup of coffee across the counter toward him. He accepted it slowly, studying her face as he did. No anger appeared in her expression. No accusation followed her greeting. She simply sat down across from him and took a small sip from her cup. The silence between them stretched longer than either expected. Easton rested his hands around the warm coffee mug while watching Valora carefully. He searched her face for any sign of what she might be thinking. Yet she remained composed. The morning air carried a calm stillness through the kitchen. Finally, Easton spoke. "You were watching the concert last night?" Valora nodded gently. "Yes." Her response carried no emotion beyond simple acknowledgement. Easton waited, expecting more. But she remained silent. He cleared his throat slightly. "You probably saw the moment people are talking about." Valora looked at him across the kitchen island. Her gaze remained steady, thoughtful. "I did." The quiet tone of her answer surprised him. No anger, no accusation, only a simple statement. Easton shifted slightly in his chair. "I should explain what happened." Valora lifted her hand softly, stopping him before he continued. "Explanations have value," she said calmly, "but they also arrive more clearly when people understand the full truth." Easton paused. Her response felt measured, deliberate. The conversation had not unfolded the way he expected. Valora placed her cup gently on the counter before speaking again. The morning light illuminated her face as she considered her words carefully. "Last night I watched the broadcast until the moment repeated several times," she said. Easton lowered his gaze toward the coffee in his hands. He expected criticism. Instead, her voice remained calm. "Moments like that rarely begin on the stage where the world sees them," she continued. "They usually begin long before." Easton looked up again. Valora met his eyes with steady composure. "Truth has a way of revealing itself," she said softly. The words hung in the quiet kitchen. They carried neither accusation nor forgiveness, only observation. Ariston struggled to respond. He had prepared himself for anger, but the calm tone of her statement unsettled him far more deeply. Her words suggested patience, reflection, a willingness to observe rather than react. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Ariston leaned back slightly in his chair while studying Valora with quiet confusion. Her reaction defied every expectation he had formed during the long drive home. He had prepared himself for confrontation. Instead, he faced something far more unsettling. Calm. Valora finished the last sip of her coffee before standing. She moved toward the sink and rinsed her cup as if the conversation had simply been part of an ordinary morning routine. Ariston watched her closely. "You're not angry?" he asked finally. Valora turned slightly toward him. Her expression remained thoughtful. "Anger can arrive quickly," she said, "but understanding requires time." The words left Ariston uncertain how to respond. He realized she was not ignoring the situation. She was observing it, carefully. The difference unsettled him, because patience often reveals truths that anger never sees. Ariston remained seated in the kitchen long after Valora left the room. For the first time since the concert, he felt something deeper than embarrassment. He felt uncertainty about what his wife might discover next. Late morning sunlight moved slowly across the Malibu house as the quiet routine of the day settled in. After leaving the kitchen, Valora walked toward a room located at the far end of the hallway. The door opened into a spacious study overlooking the ocean. Tall shelves filled with books lined the walls while a large wooden desk sat near the window. This room had once served as the center of many late-night conversations during the early years of Ariston's career. Valora stepped inside and closed the door gently behind her. She sat at the desk and opened her laptop. For several seconds she remained still, her eyes focused on the blank screen as if organizing her thoughts before beginning. Her reaction to the concert moment had surprised even herself. She had not shouted. She had not demanded explanations. Instead, she had listened, observed. Now she intended to understand. Valora knew something important about public scandals. What appears on the surface rarely reveals the full story. A single moment on television might represent a careless mistake, or it might represent a pattern that had grown slowly over time. If the relationship between Ariston and Viella involved more than a spontaneous decision at a concert, evidence might exist somewhere within the company structure. Valora typed the name of the business into the search bar. K Dynamics, the company that had grown from a fragile startup into one of the fastest expanding infrastructure firms in the technology sector, and a company whose earliest foundations she understood better than most people realized. Valora opened several business databases that tracked corporate filings, executive travel reports, and internal leadership structures. Years earlier, she had helped organize many of the first documents connected to K Dynamics. Because of that experience, she knew exactly where to look for information that outsiders might overlook. Her laptop screen filled with rows of reports and schedules, quarterly financial summaries, board meeting minutes, executive travel logs, leadership retreat planning documents. Each file revealed small pieces of the company's operational structure. Valora studied them patiently. She did not rush. Her approach remained calm and methodical, similar to someone assembling a detailed picture from many scattered fragments. Several documents outlined executive meetings held across different cities over the previous 2 years: San Francisco, Seattle, Chicago, New York. Most of those trips appeared routine for a company expanding at the pace K Dynamics had achieved. Still, Valora continued reading. Occasionally, she opened older records to compare earlier patterns with more recent ones. She wanted to understand how the leadership structure had evolved during the period when the company experienced its most rapid growth. While reviewing the documents, she made quiet notes on a legal pad beside her laptop. Names, dates, locations. Each piece of information might reveal something useful. The investigation had only begun. As Valora continued examining the records, memories from the early years of K Dynamics surfaced in her mind. At that time, the company existed only as a bold idea inside Ariston's imagination. They had lived in a small apartment with outdated furniture and stacks of technical notes covering the kitchen table. Ariston worked tirelessly writing code and designing the infrastructure model that would later attract investors. Valora supported him through every stage of that uncertain beginning. She organized investor contact lists, reviewed presentation slides, scheduled meetings with venture capital firms willing to hear Easton's proposal. When the company finally secured its first major funding round, she helped manage the administrative work needed to establish the legal structure of the business. Few people outside their closest circle knew how deeply she had been involved. After the company expanded, Easton encouraged her to step away from daily operations and focus on other interests. She agreed, believing the leadership team he hired would guide the company responsibly. Now, years later, she realized that experience gave her a rare advantage. She understood how Cade Dynamics had been assembled from the very beginning. She knew the original investors, the early board members, the operational model used to organize executive responsibilities. Those insights allowed her to interpret the records on her laptop with far greater clarity than most observers. Valora opened a leadership chart showing the executive structure of Cade Dynamics. The diagram illustrated how different departments interacted within the organization: technology development, operations management, financial planning, human resources. Each division reported through specific channels before reaching the executive leadership team. Valora examined the chart carefully. In most companies, human resources maintained a clear operational role. HR leaders typically focused on hiring practices, employee development, and internal workplace policies. They rarely participated in strategic planning sessions involving corporate expansion or investment negotiations. Yet the documents on Valora's screen suggested something slightly different. Viella Sloan's name appeared repeatedly within meeting summaries connected to major corporate decisions. Some of those meetings involved high-level negotiations with infrastructure partners. Others concerned long-term planning for international market expansion. Valora leaned back in her chair. The information did not suggest wrongdoing. However, it did reveal a level of influence that extended far beyond typical HR responsibilities. She reviewed the list again. Viella had attended several executive retreats normally limited to senior operational leaders. Valora wrote another note on her legal pad. Influence expanding. The pattern suggested that Viella had gradually positioned herself closer to the center of decision-making within the company. Valora returned to the travel records stored in the company database. These documents detailed executive schedules, connected to leadership meetings and industry conferences. She compared Easton's travel calendar with the attendance lists from those events. At first, the schedules appeared normal. Many senior leaders attended the same conferences or strategy meetings. But as Valora studied the records more closely, a subtle pattern began to emerge. Several trips listed Easton and Viella as participants in the same closed-door leadership sessions. A planning summit in Seattle, a logistics conference in Chicago, a technology strategy retreat in Northern California. Each trip had legitimate business reasons, yet the frequency of their shared travel caught Valora's attention. Over the previous 2 years, the overlap had increased steadily. She reviewed the dates again. Some of the trips had occurred only weeks apart. Others involved extended planning sessions lasting several days. Valora wrote additional notes. Travel frequency increasing, leadership influence expanding. None of the documents suggested illegal activity. Still, the pattern revealed something worth examining more closely. Valora closed the last file and sat quietly for a moment. The investigation had not uncovered proof of anything inappropriate, but it had revealed one important truth. The connection between Easton Cade and Viella Sloan extended far beyond a single moment at a concert, and Valora intended to understand exactly how deep that connection truly went. The coastal breeze moved gently through the streets of Santa Monica that afternoon. Small cafes lined the sidewalks near the beach, filled with quiet conversations and the soft clinking of cups against saucers. People worked on laptops while others relaxed beneath wide umbrellas that shaded the outdoor tables. Valora Etivan arrived early. She chose a corner table that offered privacy without drawing attention. From that seat she could see the entrance of the cafe, while remaining partially shielded from the view of other guests. A few minutes later, a tall man approached the table carrying a leather notebook beneath his arm. Evren Sable. Valora stood to greet him. They had not seen each other in several years, yet their conversation resumed easily. During their university days, Evren had developed a reputation for asking thoughtful questions and examining complicated subjects with patience. Now he worked as an investigative journalist. His articles often explored corporate leadership, financial transparency, and business ethics. After ordering coffee, they settled into their seats. Evren noticed the seriousness in Valora's expression. "You sounded thoughtful in your message," he said gently. Valora nodded. "I need help understanding something," she replied. She briefly explained the concert broadcast and the moment the world had seen on the giant screen. Evren listened without interrupting. The background noise of the cafe faded into the distance, while Valora described the records she had begun reviewing at home. By the time she finished speaking, Evren understood why she had asked to meet. Evren remained silent for several seconds after Valora finished explaining what she had discovered. His eyes moved thoughtfully across the notes she had brought with her. Travel dates, executive meetings, leadership attendance records. Each detail reflected the careful approach Valora had already taken before contacting him. "You've done a surprising amount of work already," Evren said. Valora gave a small nod. "I didn't want assumptions. I wanted information." Evren respected that answer. Many people facing emotional situations reacted immediately without gathering facts. Valora had taken the opposite path. He leaned forward slightly. "You're not asking me to investigate a scandal," he said carefully. Valora shook her head. "No. Then what exactly are you asking?" Valora folded her hands together on the table. "I want clarity," she replied. "I want to know whether the moment the world saw at that concert represents something larger inside the company." Evren studied her expression. He recognized the calm determination behind her words. This was not a woman driven by anger. She was searching for truth. Evren opened his notebook. If there are patterns inside the company structure, we can find them," he said. "Corporate organizations leave trails. Leadership decisions create records. Travel schedules, meeting minutes, and financial documents often reveal relationships that people assume remain hidden." Valora listened quietly. "Then let's follow the information," she said. Evren nodded slowly. The investigation had officially begun. During the following days, Evren began examining publicly available records connected to Cade Dynamics. As an investigative journalist, he understood how corporate leadership structures evolved as companies expanded. He reviewed press releases announcing executive retreats, conference attendance records, public filings connected to board decisions. One evening he called Valora and invited her to meet again. They returned to the same cafe in Santa Monica. Evren opened his notebook across the table. "I noticed something interesting," he said. Valora leaned forward slightly. Evren pointed towards several entries he had highlighted. "These leadership meetings show the company expanding its strategic planning team over the past 2 years. He explained how certain executives had gradually gained greater influence during that period. Some individuals moved into larger decision-making roles as the company entered new markets. Others appeared only occasionally. Valora studied the list carefully. One name appeared repeatedly: Viella Sloan. Evren continued explaining. "At first, she attended meetings connected to internal workforce development," he said. "That's typical for a human resources director." He turned the page. But over time, her presence expanded into strategic planning sessions involving corporate growth and investment partnerships. Valora read the notes slowly. Her expression remained calm, yet focused. The information confirmed something she had already suspected. Viella's role inside the company had grown far beyond traditional human resources responsibilities. Evren continued explaining the patterns he had uncovered. "The leadership structure of Cade Dynamics changed gradually over the past 2 years," he said. "At first, the executive planning group remained fairly small. Easton worked closely with the chief financial officer and the operations director." Valora nodded. "That was the original model." Evren turned another page in his notebook. Then the planning sessions began, including additional advisors, market analysts, infrastructure specialists, legal consultants. He paused briefly. "And Viella Sloan?" Valora looked up. Evren tapped the page gently. "She started attending leadership discussions that normally fall outside the responsibilities of human resources." He listed several examples: strategic planning retreats in Northern California, partnership negotiations involving international infrastructure projects, internal meetings discussing long-term investment decisions. Each event included Viella among the attendees. That level of involvement suggests she built a strong relationship with the executive leadership team, Evren explained. Valora considered the information carefully. "Or with one executive in particular," she said quietly. Evren did not disagree. In large organizations, influence often developed through proximity to decision-makers. If Viella had gained direct access to Ariston's strategic discussions, her position inside the company would have strengthened quickly. The records revealed a steady pattern: influence expanding, access increasing, and proximity to Ariston growing stronger over time. Evren closed his notebook slowly. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The information they had reviewed suggested a complicated dynamic within the leadership structure of Cade Dynamics. Valora finally broke the silence. "You believe her involvement in those meetings was intentional?" Evren considered the question carefully. "In corporate environments, proximity to leadership often creates opportunity," he said. "If someone positions themselves near strategic decision-making, their influence grows naturally." Valora studied the notes again. "So the connection between them might involve ambition?" "Possibly," Evren replied. He explained how individuals within large companies sometimes built influence through informal relationships with powerful leaders. Those relationships did not always begin with romantic intentions. Sometimes they began with shared professional goals. Long meetings, travel schedules, strategic discussions late into the evening. Over time, those interactions could create strong personal bonds. Valora listened quietly. "What matters most," Evren continued, "is understanding whether the relationship changed the balance of power inside the company." Valora looked toward the ocean visible beyond the cafe windows. "If ambition played a role," she said softly, "then the moment at the concert might reveal more than a careless decision." Evren nodded. "That possibility exists." Valora closed her notebook. The investigation had revealed something important. The connection between Ariston and Viella might involve more than emotion. It might involve power. Life inside the Malibu house continued with the same routines that had existed for years. Morning sunlight entered through the large windows facing the ocean. The kitchen filled with the familiar sounds of coffee brewing and dishes being arranged on the counter. Valora moved through the house with the same steady rhythm she had always maintained. From the outside, nothing appeared different. She prepared breakfast. She answered a few emails from community organizations she supported. She walked along the beach path in the late afternoon as she had done many times before. Anyone observing her routine would have believed the household remained peaceful. But beneath that calm surface, Valora had begun observing her husband with quiet attention. She did not question him openly. She did not accuse him. Instead, she allowed the days to unfold naturally while she watched. Her conversations with Ariston remained warm and polite. She greeted him when he returned home from work and asked about his meetings with genuine interest. Ariston seemed relieved by her behavior. Yet he also sensed something unusual. Valora's calmness carried a depth that he could not fully understand. She listened more closely now. She noticed details she once ignored. Each evening she studied his expressions while he spoke about the company and its growing responsibilities. Her actions suggested trust, but her attention suggested awareness. And that quiet awareness slowly began to shape the atmosphere inside their home. Dinner had always been an important tradition in the Cade household. Even during the busiest periods of Ariston's career, he often returned home in the evening to share a meal with Valora. The dining area faced the ocean, allowing the fading light of sunset to reflect across the table. In the days following the concert incident, that routine continued. Valora prepared meals with the same care she had shown for years. One evening she served grilled salmon with roasted vegetables while soft music played quietly in the background. Ariston joined her at the table after arriving home from the office. Their conversation began with ordinary topics: updates about company negotiations, news about mutual friends, plans for upcoming events in the community. Valora asked thoughtful questions, encouraging him to speak about his work. Her tone remained relaxed, yet Ariston sensed a subtle shift in the way she listened. Before the concert incident, she often responded immediately with her own thoughts or stories. Now she allowed him to speak longer. She observed him while he explained business strategies or described meetings with investors. Occasionally, she nodded quietly while considering his words. Ariston could not identify exactly what felt different. Nothing she said suggested suspicion, but something in her calm attention created a quiet pressure he had never felt before. During the first few days after the broadcast, Ariston had expected a confrontation. When none came, he felt temporary relief. But as time passed, That relief slowly turned into something else: uneasiness. Valora's calm behavior did not erase the memory of the concert moment. Instead, it seemed to highlight it. Each normal conversation reminded him of the silence surrounding the issue. He noticed how carefully she listened during their discussions. He noticed how often her gaze rested on him when he spoke about company activities. One evening he mentioned an upcoming meeting with several executives. Valora asked casually, "Who will be attending?" Her question sounded natural. Still, Easton hesitated before answering. He realized he had begun thinking carefully about every detail he shared. The change unsettled him. For years their marriage had been built on trust and openness. Now the quiet space between them carried new tension. Easton began arriving home earlier, hoping to maintain the sense of normalcy that Valora appeared to value. Yet each evening the same feeling returned. She remained calm, thoughtful, observant, and that steady composure made him question whether she already knew more than he realized. Valora continued her quiet observation with patience. She noticed the subtle changes in Easton's behavior. He spoke slightly faster when describing his workday. He checked his phone more frequently during the evenings. Sometimes he paused before answering questions that once required no thought at all. Valora never pointed out those changes. Instead, she stored each observation quietly in her mind. One evening, Easton described a leadership planning session scheduled for the following week. Valora listened attentively. "Is the whole executive team attending?" she asked. "Yes," he replied quickly. She nodded and continued eating without further questions. Yet the conversation had revealed something useful. Valora understood the structure of CADE dynamics well enough to know which meetings included which executives. Later that night, she reviewed the company's public calendar. The meeting Easton had mentioned involved several departments, human resources among them. Valora closed her laptop and returned to the living room. Her approach remained steady. She was not searching for confrontation. She was gathering understanding. Every conversation, every small detail, contributed to a clearer picture of what had been happening inside the company. Patience continued guiding her decisions, because patience often reveals patterns that emotional reactions hide. One evening, Easton returned home earlier than usual. The sun hovered low above the ocean, painting the water with warm shades of gold and orange. Valora stood on the balcony overlooking the shoreline. A soft breeze moved through her hair, while the waves below rolled steadily toward the beach. Easton stepped outside and joined her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They watched the horizon as the sun slowly moved toward the water. Finally, Easton broke the silence. "I know people are still discussing the concert video," he said quietly. Valora nodded without looking away from the ocean. "Public attention often fades faster than people expect," she replied. Easton turned slightly toward her. "What do you believe happened that night?" he asked. Valora considered the question carefully before answering. "I believe moments rarely appear without history behind them," she said. Her voice remained calm. The words carried quiet reflection rather than accusation. Easton looked back toward the water. For the first time since the incident, he felt the weight of the situation more clearly. Valora finally turned toward him. "Marriage faces difficult moments," she said softly. "What matters most is whether people choose honesty when those moments arrive." The sunset faded slowly behind them. Neither spoke again for several minutes. The quiet tension between them remained unspoken, yet deeply understood. Late one evening, Easton remained alone in his home office after returning from work. The room overlooked the ocean, yet his attention remained fixed on the desk in front of him. A few documents lay open, but he had stopped reading them several minutes earlier. Valora's calm words from the balcony conversation continued echoing in his thoughts. Moments rarely appear without history behind them. The sentence carried weight. Easton leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. His mind drifted toward the early years of his relationship with Valora, long before success and recognition had entered their lives. Back then, everything had felt uncertain. He remembered the pressure of launching a company without guaranteed support. Investors often dismissed young founders with ambitious ideas. Meetings ended quickly when people doubted the practicality of his vision. During those difficult months, Valora had never questioned his determination. She listened patiently when he described technical systems that few people fully understood. She encouraged him when business conversations ended in rejection. Easton remembered the long nights when he doubted himself. Valora would sit beside him, quietly reminding him why the idea mattered. Those memories returned now with surprising clarity. They reminded him that the foundation of Cade Dynamics had never belonged to him alone. It had been built through shared effort, shared belief, and shared sacrifice. Easton's thoughts moved deeper into the past. He remembered the small apartment they once shared during the earliest stage of the company. The space had been modest, one narrow living room, a kitchen barely large enough for two people to stand comfortably. Stacks of printed diagrams often covered the dining table where Easton worked late into the night. That apartment had served as both home and headquarters for Cade Dynamics. Valora often returned from her own job in the evening to find Easton still studying technical models or preparing presentations for potential investors. Instead of complaining, she joined him. She reviewed slides while he practiced explaining his vision for national infrastructure systems that would connect logistics networks more efficiently. Sometimes they ordered inexpensive takeout and continued working until midnight. Other nights they sat together quietly after finishing their tasks, discussing what life might look like if the company succeeded. Those conversations carried hope rather than certainty. Neither of them knew whether the idea would ever attract serious investment. But Valora believed in Easton's determination. She supported the vision even when the future remained unclear. Easton remembered how often she reassured him during those years. Every strong company begins with a small room and a determined idea, she once said. Now, sitting in his spacious office overlooking the ocean, that memory felt distant yet powerful. As the memories continued, Easton realized how deeply Valora had influenced the company's earliest growth. She had never sought public recognition for her involvement, yet many of the practical foundations of Cade Dynamics carried her fingerprints. Valora organized the first investor contact lists when Easton struggled to reach venture capital groups willing to hear his proposal. She helped structure the early presentation materials that eventually convinced investors to provide initial funding. When the company received its first small investment, she assisted with administrative filings required to establish the legal structure of the business. Even after Easton hired his first employees, Valora continued helping behind the scenes. She coordinated early team meetings, managed schedules, reviewed communications before they were sent to potential partners. Easton often joked that she served as the unofficial operations director during those first 2 years. The truth behind that joke had been real. Without her discipline and organizational skill, the company might have struggled to survive the fragile startup phase. Eventually, Cade Dynamics expanded beyond the small apartment. Professional managers joined the leadership team. Easton encouraged Valora to step away from daily operations once the company stabilized. She agreed without hesitation, believing his growing executive staff would guide the company forward. Now Easton realized how easily that transition had allowed him to forget the role she once played. Easton opened his eyes and stared at the quiet office around him. The success surrounding him felt very different from the humble beginning he had just remembered. Large windows framed the ocean view. Awards and framed magazine covers decorated the walls. Documents on the desk outlined expansion plans for new markets across the country. All of it represented years of work. Yet the memories of Valora's support now carried a different emotional weight. The concert moment replayed in his mind again. The giant screen, the cheering crowd, the kiss that had appeared so careless in front of thousands of strangers. He understood how that moment must have looked to anyone watching. More importantly, he understood how it must have felt to Valora. She had watched the broadcast alone inside their home. She had recognized both faces on the screen immediately. Easton leaned forward and placed his hands over his face. For the first time since the incident, guilt settled deeply within him. Valora had not confronted him. She had not shouted. Her calm response had forced him to confront his own behavior without distraction, and that quiet dignity made the weight of his actions impossible to ignore. The realization remained with him long after he left the office that night. Because reflection often reveals truths that success once made easy to overlook. Several weeks after the concert incident, Cade Dynamics hosted its annual leadership summit in Silicon Valley. The event took place inside a modern conference center known for hosting major technology gatherings. Large glass walls overlooked a landscape of office campuses and innovation hubs where many of the world's most influential technology companies operated. Executives from across the country traveled to attend. The summit served as an important moment for the company each year. Leadership teams presented updates about infrastructure development, investment partnerships, and long-term expansion strategies. It also allowed investors to observe the company's direction directly from the executives guiding its growth. Inside the conference hall, rows of seats faced a wide stage equipped with large presentation screens. Employees from various divisions filled the seats alongside invited partners and industry analysts. Quiet conversations moved through the room as people greeted colleagues and discussed the agenda for the day. Outside the main hall, journalists gathered near registration desks while reviewing press packets prepared by the company's communications team. Cade Dynamics had become one of the fastest-growing infrastructure firms in the technology sector. Because of that reputation, media organizations often covered the company's leadership summit closely. The event represented both business strategy and public image. And this year, attention surrounding the company had grown even stronger due to the widely discussed concert broadcast involving its founder. As the morning progressed, the conference hall continued filling with guests. Representatives from investment firms occupied several rows near the front of the stage. Many of them had supported Cade Dynamics during earlier funding rounds, and now monitored the company's continued expansion. Nearby, financial journalists prepared their recording devices and notebooks. They planned to document every detail of the summit. Although the official purpose of the event centered on corporate strategy, many reporters privately hoped the gathering might also address the recent public controversy surrounding Easton Cade. The viral concert footage had created weeks of discussion across business media platforms. While the story had gradually faded from headlines, curiosity remained strong. People wondered how the company's leadership would respond moving forward. Inside the hall, members of the executive team greeted investors while guiding them toward their seats. Large screens displayed a digital presentation introducing the summit's theme, Building Infrastructure for the Future. The atmosphere carried a blend of anticipation and professional formality. Some guests focused entirely on the company's technological achievements. Others quietly discussed the personal controversy that had briefly placed the founder in an uncomfortable spotlight. Either way, the audience understood that the keynote address would set the tone for the entire summit, and that keynote would be delivered by Easton Cade. Behind the stage, Easton stood inside a quiet preparation room, reviewing the notes for his keynote speech. A large digital screen displayed the presentation slides he planned to use during the address. Charts illustrated the company's growth across national infrastructure networks, while maps highlighted upcoming expansion projects. Yet Easton's attention drifted repeatedly away from the presentation. He adjusted his jacket and walked slowly across the room, trying to focus on the message he intended to deliver. For years he had spoken confidently at events like this. Investors respected his vision. Industry leaders often praised his ability to explain complex systems with clarity. But today carried a different weight. The past several weeks had forced him to reflect deeply on both his professional responsibilities and his personal life. He remembered Valora's calm voice on the balcony. What matters most is whether people choose honesty. The words returned to him again while he studied the presentation slides. This summit would shape the company's future direction. But it also represented something more personal, an opportunity to address the moment that had affected his reputation and his marriage. A member of the communications team knocked gently on the door. "They're ready for you," she said. Easton nodded slowly. He gathered his notes and walked toward the stage entrance. As guests settled into their seats inside the conference hall, the lights dimmed slightly. A quiet announcement introduced the keynote presentation. Moments later, Easton stepped onto the stage. Polite applause greeted him as he approached the podium. He began speaking about the company's progress, describing how Cade Dynamics continued expanding its infrastructure network across multiple regions. The audience listened attentively, while the presentation screens displayed graphs and maps illustrating the company's achievements. Halfway through his speech, Easton briefly scanned the audience. That was when he noticed someone he did not expect to see, Valora Edavane. She sat several rows back among the invited guests. Her posture remained composed, her expression calm as she listened to the presentation. Easton's voice paused for the smallest fraction of a second before he continued speaking. Valora rarely attended corporate events. She had chosen to remain private after stepping away from the company's early operations. Her presence at the summit carried quiet significance. A few nearby guests also recognized her and exchanged curious glances. Valora listened carefully, while Easton finished the next section of his speech. Then, after a brief pause in the presentation, she stood. Several people in the audience noticed her movement. Without hesitation, Valora stepped into the aisle and began walking slowly toward the stage. The entire room watched in silence. She walked toward the stage. The conference hall remained silent as Valora Edivan approached the stage. Executives, investors, journalists, and employees watched her movement with curiosity. The quiet footsteps across the polished floor seemed louder than they truly were, because the entire room had paused to observe what would happen next. Easton stood near the podium, momentarily unsure how to react. Valora reached the steps leading to the stage and walked up calmly. Her posture remained composed, her expression steady as she joined him beneath the bright conference lights. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The large screens behind them still displayed the final slide from Easton's presentation about infrastructure expansion. Yet the audience's attention had shifted entirely. Valora looked across the hall. Hundreds of faces watched her closely. Some people recognized her immediately as Easton's wife. Others understood her identity only after whispering quietly with the person seated beside them. She stepped closer to the microphone. Her voice carried clearly across the room. "Good afternoon." The greeting sounded simple, yet it carried quiet confidence. A few journalists lifted their cameras. Others prepared their notebooks, sensing that something significant was about to occur. Valora continued, "Many of you came here today to hear about the future of K Dynamics." She paused briefly before adding another sentence. "But sometimes the future of a company is shaped not only by strategy, it is shaped by character." The hall remained completely still as she continued speaking. Valora allowed her gaze to move across the audience before continuing. Several investors leaned forward in their seats. Journalists held their pens above open notebooks, ready to record every word. She understood that many people in the room already knew about the moment that had spread across social media weeks earlier. Ignoring the topic would only leave questions unanswered. So she chose direct honesty. "Over the past few weeks," Valora said calmly, "many people have discussed a moment that occurred during a music festival in Los Angeles." A quiet ripple moved through the audience. Everyone knew exactly what she meant. The concert broadcast, the giant screen, the kiss that had traveled across the internet. Valora's tone remained measured and composed. "The video from that night circulated quickly," she continued. "For many viewers it appeared to reveal something about my marriage." She did not raise her voice. She did not sound angry. Instead, she spoke with thoughtful clarity. When moments like that appear in public, people often form immediate conclusions. Several audience members nodded slightly. Valora understood the weight of public opinion. Headlines and speculation could shape reputations within hours, but she also understood something deeper. "However," she continued, "real relationships are more complex than a single moment captured on a screen." Her statement shifted the atmosphere in the room. The audience now realized that this speech would address more than corporate strategy. Valora turned briefly toward Easton, before looking back at the audience. The quiet strength in her posture reflected years of experience facing difficult situations with patience. "Marriage," she said, "is not a perfect agreement between two flawless people. It is a commitment between two individuals who continue learning how to grow together." Her words carried sincerity rather than criticism. "Over time," she continued, "success can create distance if people stop paying attention to the foundation that once held them together." Several listeners exchanged thoughtful glances. Valora spoke with the calm voice of someone who had spent many days reflecting carefully. When people build companies, careers, and public reputations, they often invest enormous energy into those goals. She paused briefly. "But relationships require the same dedication." Her gaze returned to Easton for a moment. "Accountability becomes important when people realize they have allowed something valuable to weaken." The audience understood the meaning behind her statement. She was not speaking as an angry spouse confronting a mistake. She was speaking as a partner who understood the responsibility shared by both individuals in a marriage. "True strength," Valora said, "appears when people acknowledge their mistakes and choose honesty instead of pride." The quiet room absorbed every word. Valora took a slow breath before speaking again. Her final message carried the quiet authority that had guided her through the weeks following the concert incident. Many people expected anger from me, she said. Some members of the audience smiled faintly at the honesty of that statement. Valora continued. Anger is easy. It arrives quickly and demands immediate reaction. But understanding requires patience. She stepped slightly closer to Easton. For weeks I reflected on the history of my marriage, she said. I remembered the early years when Easton and I worked together to build the company that stands before you today. Her voice remained steady. That history matters more than a single public moment. The audience remained completely silent. Valora reached for Easton's hand. I believe accountability matters, she said. And I believe forgiveness requires courage. Then she looked directly at the audience. I choose forgiveness. A quiet gasp moved through the hall. The statement carried enormous emotional weight. Easton stood beside her, visibly moved by the unexpected declaration. Valora's decision transformed the atmosphere of the room. Instead of witnessing a public confrontation, the audience had witnessed something far more powerful. Strength, dignity, and a choice that few people expected. For several seconds after Valora's declaration, the conference hall remained completely silent. The audience absorbed the meaning of her words, while hundreds of eyes turned toward Easton Cade. Investors, journalists, and company executives waited to see how the founder of Cade Dynamics would respond. Easton stood beside the podium, still holding Valora's hand. The weight of the moment was unmistakable. He slowly stepped forward toward the microphone. When he spoke, his voice carried a level of honesty that many in the audience had never heard from him before. Over the past few weeks, he began, many people have formed opinions about what they saw during that concert broadcast. His eyes briefly moved across the audience before returning to Valora. What they saw was a moment of poor judgment on my part. The admission arrived clearly, and without hesitation. I allowed my responsibilities and my success to distract me from the person who stood beside me during the most uncertain years of my life. The hall remained silent as his words continued. I also recognize that leadership requires accountability, he said. When someone holds a position of influence, personal choices carry consequences that extend beyond private life. He paused briefly. I accept responsibility for the moment the world witnessed. His apology carried sincerity rather than defense. And the audience understood that something genuine was unfolding on the stage. Easton turned slightly toward Valora while continuing to speak. For many people in this room, Cade Dynamics represents a successful company, he said. But its foundation was built during years when success felt far from certain. He looked toward the audience again. During those early years, the person who believed in the company most strongly was not an investor or an analyst. It was my wife. Valora stood quietly beside him while the audience listened closely. Easton continued describing the early period of their lives together. When the company existed only as a concept written on notebooks and whiteboards, Valora worked beside me every night. She helped organize our first presentations to investors. She managed early planning meetings while I focused on developing the infrastructure model. Several executives in the audience exchanged thoughtful glances. Few people had realized how deeply Valora had been involved in the company's beginning. Easton's voice softened slightly. Without her patience and discipline during those years, Cade Dynamics might never have grown beyond that small apartment where we first began. He turned toward Valora. I allowed myself to forget that history. The statement carried quiet regret, and forgetting that history was my greatest mistake. The conference hall remained silent for a moment after Easton finished speaking. Then someone in the audience began clapping. The applause started quietly from a few seats near the front of the room. Within seconds, more people joined. Investors, employees, and journalists gradually rose to their feet. The applause spread across the entire hall. Many people recognized the courage required to acknowledge personal mistakes in such a public setting. Corporate events rarely included moments of emotional honesty. Yet the scene unfolding on stage carried a sincerity that people respected. Some members of the audience nodded thoughtfully while continuing to applaud. Others exchanged quiet comments with colleagues seated beside them. For journalists in the room, the moment represented an unexpected story. Instead of witnessing corporate damage control, they had witnessed a personal acknowledgement of responsibility, combined with a powerful declaration of forgiveness. The applause continued for several seconds before slowly fading. Easton and Valora stood side by side while the room settled again. The atmosphere inside the hall had changed. The earlier curiosity surrounding the scandal had transformed into respect for the dignity both individuals displayed. For many people in the audience, the moment had become a reminder that leadership involved more than financial success. It also involved character. Across the hall, Viella Sloan sat several rows away from the stage. Throughout the entire exchange, she had remained silent. Her posture remained composed, yet the expressions moving across her face revealed deep reflection. The applause gradually faded while Easton and Valora continued standing together at the front of the room. Several nearby attendees noticed Viella as she slowly rose from her seat. She gathered her folder and tablet quietly. Without drawing attention to herself, she walked toward the aisle. Few people spoke as she moved past the rows of chairs. The quiet dignity displayed on the stage had shifted the emotional tone of the entire summit. Viella understood that the moment had changed the dynamics surrounding her role within the company. She reached the exit doors at the back of the hall and paused briefly before stepping outside. The corridor beyond the conference room felt quiet compared to the energy inside. Viella walked slowly down the hallway, her thoughts clearly focused on what the future might hold. Inside the conference hall, the summit continued. But the leadership structure of Cade Dynamics had already begun changing, and the public moment that began with a concert broadcast had now reached a turning point no one had predicted. In the weeks following the leadership summit, changes began taking shape inside Cade Dynamics. The company had grown rapidly during the previous years, and the recent public moment had reminded the leadership team that strong organizations required clear internal structure. Several senior executives met privately to review the company's operational guidelines and reporting relationships. Those meetings focused on strengthening professional boundaries between departments. Human resources returned to a more traditional advisory role within the organization. Strategic planning sessions involving corporate expansion, financial partnerships, and infrastructure development were now limited to specific executive groups whose responsibilities aligned directly with those decisions. These adjustments were not framed as punishment toward any individual. Instead, they were presented as improvements designed to reinforce professional clarity across the company. Employees noticed the shift quickly. New internal policies clarified which departments participated in certain leadership discussions. Executive travel planning also became more structured, ensuring that meetings involving sensitive negotiations included multiple leaders rather than smaller informal groups. The changes created a more transparent environment. For Easton, the adjustments represented an opportunity to restore balance between his leadership responsibilities and the organizational culture he wanted Cade Dynamics to represent. He spoke openly with the executive team about maintaining professionalism at every level of the company. The message was simple: growth required discipline, and discipline required structure. Several months after the summit, Viella Sloan made a professional decision that surprised few people inside the company. She accepted a leadership role with another organization based in a different state. The announcement arrived through an internal company message, thanking her for the work she had contributed during her years at Cade Dynamics. The message highlighted her involvement in developing employee training programs and improving workplace policies during a period of rapid company expansion. Most employees responded respectfully. Viella had built a reputation as a capable professional during her time with the company. Many colleagues appreciated the structure she had brought to human resources operations. Yet the events surrounding the leadership summit had clearly changed the environment within Cade Dynamics. Moving to a new company offered Viella the opportunity to begin a fresh chapter in her career without the constant attention connected to the earlier controversy. Her final day passed quietly. A few coworkers gathered to wish her well before she departed for the next stage of her professional journey. Easton acknowledged her contributions with a brief message expressing appreciation for her work within the organization. The transition remained professional and respectful. Sometimes the most effective way to restore balance inside a company involved allowing people to pursue new opportunities elsewhere. Public attention surrounding the concert broadcast gradually faded as news stories captured the interest of media outlets. News cycles moved quickly, and the technology industry continued producing announcements that filled business headlines. New startup investments, product launches, and market developments soon replaced the earlier discussion about Easton Cade's personal life. For journalists who had attended the leadership summit, The story eventually became less about scandal and more about the unusual response they had witnessed on stage. Several opinion columns even praised the calm dignity displayed by Valora during her speech. Instead of creating a public confrontation, she had chosen a thoughtful approach that surprised many observers. Within a few months, most public conversations about the incident disappeared completely. Cade Dynamics continued expanding its infrastructure network across several regions of the country. Investors remained confident in the company's long-term direction. Inside the Malibu home, life also began settling into a quieter rhythm. The tension that had once surrounded the household slowly eased as time passed. Easton and Valora continued sharing evening walks along the beach and long conversations about their future together. The moment that once dominated public attention had gradually become a private memory between them. And sometimes the greatest test of a relationship does not come from the mistake itself. It comes from what people choose to build afterward. Time passed quietly after the leadership summit. The intense public attention that once surrounded the concert moment faded into the background of daily life. Inside the Malibu home, however, something more meaningful began taking shape. Healing. Rebuilding trust did not happen overnight. Neither Valora nor Easton expected immediate transformation. Instead, they allowed their relationship to grow stronger through small actions repeated day after day. Easton began making deliberate changes in his routine. He returned home earlier whenever possible. Evening meetings that once filled his schedule were reduced so he could spend more time with Valora. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to step away from constant work responsibilities and focus on the relationship that had supported him from the beginning. Valora noticed those changes. She did not praise them openly or question them. She simply acknowledged them through the quiet warmth that had always defined her character. Conversations gradually became deeper. Instead of discussing only business updates or daily plans, they spoke about personal values, priorities, and the future they wanted to create together. Some evenings included difficult reflections about the past. Other evenings focused on shared hopes. The rebuilding process remained steady and sincere. Trust grows through consistent action, and slowly, the foundation of their marriage began strengthening once again. One of the simplest traditions returned to their lives: evening walks along the Malibu shoreline. The beach stretched quietly beneath the wide sky while the sun slowly descended toward the horizon. Waves rolled gently across the sand, creating a steady rhythm that encouraged reflection. Valora and Easton walked side by side along the water's edge. The ocean breeze moved softly through the air while seabirds crossed the fading light above them. These walks became an important part of their healing. Away from boardrooms, conference halls, and public expectations, the beach offered space for honest reflection. Sometimes they spoke about memories from their early years together. They laughed about small moments from the apartment where the company began. Other evenings remained quiet. They simply listened to the sound of the waves while sharing the peaceful atmosphere. For Easton, those walks reminded him of something he had nearly forgotten. Success meant little without meaningful relationships beside it. For Valora, the shoreline symbolized patience. The ocean continued moving forward regardless of storms that had passed before. Each evening they returned home feeling calmer than the day before. Step by step, conversation by conversation, their connection deepened again. As weeks turned into months, the conversations between Valora and Easton became more open than they had been in many years. One evening, they sat together on the balcony, overlooking the ocean. The night air felt cool while the distant sound of waves reached the house below. Easton spoke first. "I should have spoken more honestly long before the concert happened," he admitted. Valora listened quietly. He explained how pressure from constant leadership decisions had slowly created emotional distance in his life. Work had consumed his attention. Success had brought admiration from investors and industry leaders, yet it had also distracted him from the personal commitments that mattered most. Valora responded thoughtfully. "Ambition builds great achievements," she said, "but relationships require the same attention." Their conversation continued late into the evening. They discussed lessons learned during the difficult weeks that followed the public broadcast. They also spoke about boundaries they wanted to protect moving forward. Professional responsibilities would always remain important, but they both agreed that the strength of their marriage required equal care. That night ended with a shared understanding. Honesty had restored something valuable between them. As their connection strengthened, small expressions of affection returned naturally. Morning coffee shared on the balcony, quiet laughter during dinner conversations, gentle gestures that reflected comfort and familiarity. One evening, Easton arrived home carrying a small bouquet of flowers he had purchased on the way back from the office. Valora smiled when he handed them to her. "You remembered," she said. Easton nodded. Some things deserve attention. They placed the flowers in a glass vase on the kitchen counter. Moments like that reminded both of them that affection often appears in the simplest actions. Weeks later, they attended a small community event near Malibu, where local organizations celebrated coastal conservation projects. Walking through the gathering together, they felt the calm confidence that had once defined their relationship. When they returned home that evening, they stood together on the balcony, watching the moonlight reflect across the ocean. Easton wrapped his arm gently around Valora. This time, the moment belonged only to them. No cameras, no headlines, only quiet understanding. Sometimes the strongest expressions of love appear after people choose to rebuild what once felt broken. One evening near the end of summer, Valora and Easton walked again along the Malibu shoreline. The sky glowed with soft colors as the sun disappeared beyond the ocean horizon. They paused near the water and watched the waves move steadily across the sand. Easton spoke quietly. "You gave me more patience than I deserved." Valora looked toward the horizon before answering. "Forgiveness is not about ignoring mistakes," she said. "It is about choosing growth after understanding the truth." Her words reflected the lesson that had guided their journey. Relationships face difficult moments. Trust may weaken, but honesty and humility can rebuild what once seemed fragile. Valora turned toward him. "The real test of love appears when people decide what to do after disappointment." Easton nodded slowly. "And you chose grace." Valora smiled softly. "Grace requires strength." They continued walking along the shoreline as the evening sky darkened. "Before this story ends, think about something important. Do you believe forgiveness requires strength? Or do you believe some mistakes should never receive a second chance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Stories like this remind us that relationships grow stronger when people face truth with courage and choose growth instead of bitterness.
Sometimes the strongest response is grace.